So back in the early 2000s, there's the Nickelodeon show The Fairly Oddparents, an episodic cartoon that ran for 10 seasons, and it was pretty good. It wasn't one of the shows I was obsessed with growing up, and was instead something I'd watch if nothing better was airing, but on my list of backup shows, it was very much near the top. I'd give it a high B tier if I had to put my childhood shows in a tier list. From what I remember of it, and after watching a few episodes recently, it's a fun show. The plots are pretty nonsensical, but that's the beauty of it. The comedy is good because there are so many jokes you're bound to laugh at some of them, and the cynical comedy it has at times works for me, at least when it's not being sexist, because there are admittedly many moments really didn't age well. The characters are not the thing I remember in the best light. Pretty sure I felt neutral toward most of them, only truly liking the smart characters for being smart or the baby for being a cute baby, and I dislike the more stupid characters, although looking at it now, Timmy's parents are very funny in how horrible they are. All this to say, I think it's a pretty good cartoon, though it didn't impact me as much as other shows did, and as a result I don't have the same level of nostalgia to it other people might have. I get why it was so popular, but at the same time it doesn't affect me to see how much it fell from grace in those last few seasons, which admittedly I didn't watch. From what I remember, I didn't see a single episode with Chloe or Sparky as a kid. I stopped at season 8 and one of those shitty live action movies. Speaking of which, despite my somewhat mixed opinion on Fairly Oddparents, this was one of the two biggest Nickelodeon shows along with SpongeBob. And because of that, the network refused to let it die until its reputation was in the mud. And even then, they tried to revive it once or twice, to everyone's discontent given how badly they handled it. The discovery that the creator of the show, Butch Hartman, is a pretty shitty person didn't help. But recently, a new attempt was made, and not only with some of the writers of Infinity Train on board, but without any involvement from Butch Hartman. And the new reboot that got everyone back on the Oddparent train is what we're going to talk about today. Hey everyone, it's HelloFleur here, and today we'll be talking about Fairly Oddparents: A New Wish, a show that flew completely under my radar until people started posting that one Perry scene, and then I saw the Periwinkle Cospa part of the episode Lost in Fairy World, fell in love with the character writing, and ended up watching the whole thing, and it's really fucking good. So here we are now to review this season, especially since it's on Netflix now. On that note, please go watch it there. The Netflix rating is what will determine whether we'll get a season 2 or not, and this show was clearly written with the second season in mind and I needed it to happen. Like I said, some of the writers work on Infinity Train, one of the absolute best kids cartoons ever made. Please give New Wish a chance. At least let it play in the background while you do something else so it gets the views. Anyways, now, I don't know if I'm the most qualified person to make a cartoon review since I didn't exactly study filmmaking. I just like talking about the stuff I'm passionate about. But you know, I'm gonna try, so let's see how it goes. So, Fairly Oddparents: A New Wish. Both a reboot and sequel to the original Fairly Oddparents. It originally aired on TV starting in May and lasting all throughout the summer in an episode release speed that I'm not too fond of. We were basically getting an episode every 2 days, so if you wanted to catch up without binge watching, good luck. And since it was airing on TV, there wasn't exactly a legal way to see it if you missed an episode, and the ships understandably take a while to bring the cargo in if you catch my drift. To make it worse, it just came out on Netflix, which also dumps it all at once. Remember when one show used to have 1 or 2 episodes a week, giving us several days to go crazy and terrorize and be excited for what's to come and stuff? I miss those days. Anyways, going back to the show itself, since it's a remake of sorts and takes place 20 years after the original, it introduces the new protagonist Hazel Wells, who, after moving to a new city and struggling to adapt to a new situation, especially due to being separated from her brother who went to college, learns that her new neighbors Cosmo and Wanda are magical social workers who become her godparents. From there, the show devolves into 2 different shows actually, at least until the finale. One is a light-hearted episodic show about Hazel making wishes and learning things. The other is a serious show about Hazel, her classmate Dev, and their connection to Fairy World. Stories that plays out in about 9-10 episodes depending on which ones you include. And just so you know, I'm going to talk about those specific episodes in the spoiler section, because yeah, I'm going to have both a no spoilers and a spoiler section in this review. Again, please go watch this show, it's like 5 hours long max. I'm also making a third section where I'll go over each and every episode and give a quick opinion of them, because I don't know, I like to talk about stuff. Anyway, let's start this review with...
I'm Cosmo!
I'm Wanda!
And we're... your next door neighbors!
So, the episodic side of this show. Like I just said, it's mainly a light-hearted fun show about Hazel and her fairies. Most episodes are about Hazel having some issue or thinking she has an issue because she tends to overthink things sometimes. She makes a wish, things go well until they don't, and she tries to fix the situation, learning something along the way. This is the basic premise of the show. For this review, I'm going to start with talking about the presentation elements, meaning the animation, soundtrack, voice acting, things like that, and then we get to the writing, with the spoiler section going more into detail for some of the writing on top of talking about the overarching story. Starting off with something that's apparently pretty controversial, the animation. In my opinion, it's really good. While I definitely have a soft spot for 2D animation, mainly due to how you can basically do anything you can imagine with it, which makes for amazing visuals, I can still enjoy good 3D animation, especially in modern movies. Some of this stuff looks stunning. And in a time where 3D animation in cartoons is still very rough because of budget restrictions, New Wish comes out of it looking surprisingly good. Like, this show is very pretty. Plus, they perfectly managed to transcribe the looks of the original show into 3D, which is a breath of fresh air when looking at what this franchise gave us previously. And random thing, but I love the fact that the fairies are so short. It was already the case in the original with them being the size of a child, but it feels more visible in New Wish with them being straight up shorter than the kids. I don't know, I like the decision. Shout out to Perry who's smaller than Cosmo and Wanda, which makes him extra tiny when next to the kids. I also really appreciate that the animation team was able to keep the characters somewhat cartoony despite them being 3D models. They were still able to give them exaggerated facial expressions and stretch their limbs at times, and I think that cartoony aspect also helps with some of the less smooth moments that some people have complained about. I'll go against the grind here and say that, given the tone and style of the show, I think having a character jump from one position to another works and doesn't feel cheap. Now, that's not to say the animation is perfect. You could probably comb through the show and find animation errors here and there, but then again, which show doesn't have any mistakes? Honestly, I think the only animation error that bothers me is the 10 seconds moment in the first episode. Anything else I caught was noticed on the third or fourth watch, and I only caught like 2 of them. You do have some weird cuts a few times, which is a lot more noticeable. Like again, in the first episode during the phone call with Anthony, it looks like a line or 2 of dialogue was cut, but thankfully this doesn't happen often. Also, the original show was far from perfect either. From my experience, that's just how kid shows usually are unless the studio is willing to lend them extra cash, mostly in Disney's case. And speaking of the limits of 3D animation, Cosmo and Wanda definitely don't have that many transformations when compared to the original show, but I think the team managed well enough with what they had. There's enough variety in the few we have, plus the human disguises justifies Cosmo and Wanda not having to constantly turn into random animals. Lastly, for the animation, there's a lot of 2D animation used there and there which I really appreciate. Basically, every title card, picture or flashback is in 2D, in a style resembling the original show. I honestly love the effort that went into this detail. Although the 2D animation is also used once or twice in the background, which I'm not that into. Like at some point there's water flowing from a building and it's in 2D, or doing a musical number where all the backgrounds are 2D with the characters still in 3D. And in that case specifically, I'm sorry but it looks weird. But other than that, the 2D being used for pictures and title cards is very clever and works incredibly well. Now moving on from the animation to talk about the soundtrack, I'll be honest, I did not pay much attention to it on first watch, but I think that means it's good in the sense that it fits the situation and isn't intrusive. Same deal with the sound effects, they happen when they need to and feel natural with what's happening on screen. Now I did go listen to the soundtrack for this video, and yeah, it's good, very jazzy, I like it. As for the songs with lyrics, the intro is a banger, amazing update from the original, and the other songs are fine. I'm not going to say it's better or worse than the original because honestly the only song I remember from it is My Shiny Teeth and Me, so I can't really compare. Even after watching a bunch of old episodes, I didn't really land on the musical ones. Also, I grew up watching Phineas and Ferb, guys, nothing is beating the music of this show. Like for the soundtrack, I can't say I paid much attention to the voice acting while watching, which usually means it's very good. And after paying more attention for this review, it is really good. Not sure what else to say. I enjoy everyone's performances and I can't think of a single character who sounds weird or off. So yeah, the voice acting is great. And I guess since we're talking about the non-writing element of the show, this is a good place to talk about the representation. To be honest, I'm not sure what to say other than I think they did a pretty good job. There are many characters of color, including our main character, which is neat. We have Win, who is non-binary and they are allowed to just exist without having to justify their gender. You have a Muslim girl amongst the recurring background school kids, although she's sadly one of the unnamed ones and must have like a single line of dialogue. And in one episode we have every student falling in love with Hazel, including the girls, and both the girls and the boys liking her is put on the same level. Finally, you have Hazel and her father coming off as autistic, which I'll expand on when talking about the characters. Oh, and if you want to include it, Cosmo already came off as neurodivergent in the original show, which continues here, and they mention his pregnancy twice without saying anything about humans and fairies' biology being different. And with the fairies looking like humans and living a lot like them, someone who never watched the original show might believe fairies and humans have the same things in their pants. All this to say, this show basically made Cosmo trans. So yeah, overall, the total representation is pretty good and respectful. It's not groundbreaking by any means, but it treats everyone the same, which really helps with normalization. And it feels nice to know we live in a time where a show is allowed to have characters of all kind just exist without having to make a big deal out of it. The only complaint I have for the representation is the fact that Hazel is so clearly autistic, and I wish they explicitly said so instead of just calling her quirky once and never bringing it up again. Though maybe this is due to Nickelodeon and Netflix apparently not wanting her to be called weird, who knows. Moving on to the last not writing part, the references. Being a reboot and especially a sequel, the show obviously references the original, and I think for the most part it did a great job with it. It brings back elements from the original in a respectful way, for the most part giving them a purpose in the story or being something in the background they don't draw attention to. And obviously for the fairy side of the story they had to bring back elements like jargon or the book, and like for the other references it's done very well. We even got Cosmo and Wanda's rubber and pencil transformations. But in my opinion the best references are the Dimadoms and Perry, because in both cases they brought back an element from the original show while at the same time making it brand new. The crew was basically able to have their cake and eat it too with those two instances. Also, I love the Dimadoms references if only for the hat, like seeing that giant building in the background. It's just amazing, I love it. Overall, I think the only reference I dislike is the school mascot being a Timmy squirrel. I just don't get the decision. But other than that, I like them. So that's all I'm going to say about it in this part to avoid spoiling those who want to be surprised. I'm just going to say, since it's in the pilot, there's that character based on Timmy's adult design from the very first episode of the original show, and the creators confirm that it's not him, it's just some rando, just so you know. Now, onto the longest part of this review, the writing, which includes the comedy, world building, overall tone and characters. There's also the story, but that's for the spoilers and episode review sections. Not sure how to order though, so we're going to go from what I find the least properly done to what was done the best. For me, the weakest part out of all of those is the world building, for two reasons, the lack of explanation of the old lore and some personal preferences. For the lack of explanation, I've seen a few people on both Tumblr and YouTube being confused about a few things, for example wondering if Cosmo and Wanda still have to hide themselves from others, since the show doesn't actually mention it up until a few episodes in. When watching myself, I also remember wondering how long it would be until they tried to grant a wish only for their wands to fail, and it took until episode 10 for it to happen. Before that, they just explained to Hazel why a wish can't work instead of trying it and then have the rules thrown in their faces. Then again, they are consistent about it in your wish. The only times Cosmo and Wanda try granting a wish only for it to fail are when they have no idea it will fail, but that maintains that it can be confusing the first time around. Then there's also the fact that some basic rules like the true love or cheating ones aren't explored until much later or are just casually mentioned. And while I get why the true love one isn't brought up given the plot the show has, why wasn't the cheating rule called out when Hazel wished for a science fair project to work? Even when Cosmo and Wanda explain what their wish did, they don't tell Hazel why they had to do this workaround. All this to say, New Wish seems to take some lore and world building from the original show, which makes sense because it takes place in the same continuity, but it doesn't bother explaining some of this world building. And considering this is a kids show meaning it's aimed at an audience that's too young to have watched the original, it doesn't work all that well. That doesn't mean they just throw everything at you without context. For example, they explain one important element in Fairy Day which they also give a new spin to, and obviously all the returning major characters like Cosmo, Wanda and Jargon are properly introduced, but a lot of the world building and rules are still included as if they were expecting you to already know them. And I actually find that pretty funny when knowing some of the writers worked on Infinity Train, because I find the first season of Infinity Train pretty clumsy in how it introduces some major elements, but then starting with season 2 you already know how the show goes so we can jump right to it and the writing becomes amazing. So it feels like maybe those guys just struggle with introductions. And honestly, as someone who never writes original fiction and likes not having to introduce the characters in fics, I get it. Then again, I'm not a professional writer being paid for my work. Now that's all for the world building based on the original show, but on top of it, New Wish also introduces its own new element when it comes to how fairy world works, and that's where the personal preference part comes into play. Basically, whenever Hazel makes a wish related to things like time travel or music for example, Cosmo and Wanda don't grant the wish themselves. Instead they summon a fairy or other being specialized in it. These characters can also appear if Hazel makes a wish that ends up messing with what their specialty is. And the thing with that concept is that I genuinely think it's a good idea that expands Fairy World in a very interesting way, especially since Hazel can just visit the place willy-nilly. Thanks Timmy. But at the same time, I just don't like it. I prefer when Hazel makes wishes to her fairies. I don't know, it's more cozy and familiar I guess, which I enjoy more. But again, I still think the inclusion of those fairies is a good idea, hence why I say it's a personal preference issue. I still think it was a clever way to see more of Fairy World without bringing Hazel straight into it. It's just not my thing. And speaking of Fairy World, another world building idea which I do like a lot is the way wishing for normal things still carries some magic to it. For example, when you wish to only eat one specific thing, you're eating magic food which has an effect, or if you wish to be a teenager, you get fairy puberty. It's a very fun way to create conflict in otherwise low stakes episodes. Of course, I can understand people thinking the opposite. It can be seen as forced conflict that is pulled out of the writer's ass for plot convenience, but I disagree. I think it's effective and fun and a good expansion of the lore. Now continuing with the second aspect of the writing of the show, I'm going to go with the overall writing, so stuff like the tone, pacing, a few writing decisions I want to bring up, and with some comparisons with the original show because some elements are easier to explain when compared to something else. This part is going to be a bit all over the place, sorry in advance. Starting with the tone, this show is a lot more sweet and wholesome than the original. Gunn is a cynical kid living the worst possible life in a mean-spirited world. Hazel is an absolute sweetheart, her parents are genuinely good people trying their best, her teacher is very nice, Cosmo and Wanda have a loving and absolutely adorable relationship. I love everything about those two, and while there are a few antagonistic people in Hazel's life, it's nothing compared to Timmy's murderous babysitter, fairy catching teacher, or that one Star Wars reference. That's not to say the show is all sunshine and rainbows, especially since the show takes abusive relationships a lot more seriously, and also the writer of this show really like to do horror plot, so warning about creepy stuff in some episodes I guess. But yeah, it's definitely a much more positive show than the original, lots of good vibes from it. It's also more grounded than the original, so to speak, as in things are a lot more realistic than the original. Like obviously it's still the same world in which magic and fairies exist, but the show isn't as cartoonishly exaggerated in its situations. Again, no babysitter or Star Wars villain trying to kill Hazel. Her issues are a lot more realistic, even with the magical elements added to it. The fact we don't see as much of everyone might also contribute to that, though I'm not sure. And this is also what I meant in the intro when talking about how much I love the character writing in Lost in Fairy World. They feel like realistic people and the dialogue is very natural, which I really enjoy. By the way, I'm comparing the two shows right now to better explain Your Wish's vibe, but I very much love that it's a more cozy show grounded in reality. It gives the show its charm, and the quote-unquote realism works incredibly well for a semi-serialized show, especially when the crux of the character development for one character is tied to the abuse being realistic. And speaking of the story, the pacing of each episode is a bit of a mixed bag for me. Some episodes work incredibly well with proper pacing, while others either drag a bit too much or feel way too short. Special mention to Fairy for a Day, in which the credits begin to roll before the main conflict is even solved. There's also two episodes which I'll get to in the spoiler section who rush things a bit. So all in all, the pacing is very good at times but very bad at others. Still keeping on the negatives, it sometimes feels like the show was written for a younger audience than the original, mainly by being a tad on the nose at times. For example, in the very first scene of the first episode, having Hazel pretend one of the rocks is a fairy, or in one episode in which Cosmo and Wanda suddenly bring up a specific character for the first time and guess who showed up in that same episode? Although for the most part, the more in-your-face writing doesn't bother me, and it doesn't happen all that often anyways. Like those are literally the only two examples I can think of from the top of my head. And outside of that, there are many examples of the writing being very clever, but most of what I could say about it would fall into spoilers territory. Let's just say here that one of the reasons why the characters feel so realistic is thanks to the amazing writing. That being said, there are a few episodes I don't find all that good or even dislike, but for the most part the writing is very good. It just feels more childlike compared to the original show. If I had to expand on the writing a bit more and why I mostly love it, the pilot for example is an absolutely amazing first impression. It shows you who Hazel is and why you should care about her, how her family situation is going, it reintroduces Cosmo and Wanda perfectly, it gives you a first idea of Hazel's school environment. It's just everything you'd want from a first episode. And after that, I'd say the vast majority of episodes are fun, with the biggest standouts for me being the serialized ones. Every time the show gets into the story it becomes amazing. But again, the episodic side is still a very good watch and I highly recommend it. Hell, I find watching all the serialized episodes back to back to be less enjoyable than having the episodic ones in between, if only because it allows you to see more on the story and enjoy a fun time before going back into the angst. But yeah, I'd say every episode is worth a watch, even those I dislike have some interesting elements to them. And again, it's not a very long show, you can afford to watch all of it. Going back to comparing the two shows, one thing I noticed when watching the original is that it was pretty common for Cosmo and Wanda to split up, leaving Timmy with only one fairy, usually Cosmo. For example, in a partnership when Cosmo runs off to his mom, leaving Timmy with Wanda for a while. In Wanda's Day Off and Was Wanda, Timmy spends the whole episode with Cosmo. Same for Hurricane, in which Wanda is off with Spoof. In Mission Responsible and Flyboy, Timmy is left alone with Spoof for most of the episode. In Super Zero and Fairly Oddparents, Cosmo is fucking around, so Timmy spends the day with Wanda. You get the idea. Again, it happens pretty often. In Your Wish, however, this never happens. Cosmo and Wanda are always with Hazel as a duo, and I think it's a shame. The thing with splitting them up is that it allowed for more diverse character interactions. It wasn't just Timmy with Cosmo and Wanda, it was also Timmy with Cosmo and Timmy with Wanda. I hope what I'm saying makes sense. But in the new show, we don't have that kind of diversity in their interactions. When Hazel is talking to her fairies, she's always talking to both of them, and both of them respond. I really wish we had some opportunities to have Hazel with only one fairy. Like I don't know, in Cookie's Court, have Cosmo be the only one on trial, and Hazel and Wanda have to find proof of his innocence together. Or in Dig a Little Deeper, have one of the fairies get taken along with the wands. Hell, what about Clock to the Future? I just think it would have been interesting to see Hazel 101 with the fairies. Hopefully, with one change of status quo made in the finale, we will get opportunities to see Cosmo and Wanda on their own in a potential season 2. Speaking of Cosmo and Wanda, one thing I really like about New Wish is that we get to see how these two usually act with their godkids. What I mean is that, in the original show, Timmy was an exception. Godparents aren't replacement parents. They're supposed to be adults a child can trust and rely on, which is what they do with Hazel and what they're supposed to do with every godchild. But with Timmy, by the time season 6 rolled around and Cosmo and Wanda became parents, they pretty much started to treat Timmy as their own, having a scrapbook for him, interacting with him the same way they do their son, calling Poof his little brother, you get the idea. Due to how terrible Timmy's situation was, Cosmo and Wanda pretty much adopted him, making him an exception compared to the other god kids. And that's something I like about Hazel. She's the rule, she's how Cosmo and Wanda are supposed to be with their god kids, and I like seeing a different dynamic. I also find it interesting how it allows Cosmo and Wanda to have a life outside of Hazel. They live across the hall rather than in her house, they sometimes only join her after breakfast and leave her alone in the evening, they interact with other adults. I just really like seeing them have a life outside of their god kid. And again, we get to see how they really are when being actual godparents. Really nice stuff. Last thing about the overall writing I really like is the fact that the characters don't use technology much. Like in modern shows, it feels like a lot of writers try to put technology in. Sometimes it works, but most times it really doesn't. Even the original show apparently tried it and it didn't work, like, at all. So in New Wish, I'm glad they don't rely on technology for important plots or to try and make jokes that only date the show. Hazel has a phone, but she barely uses it, and outside of her, you do have the Gymadomes with Dev having his drones and a tablet, on top of Whisper Fred's whole ASMR gig, but it's not something constantly new face or that they overuse. Hell, whenever Dev uses his tablet, you don't even get to see what's on it. It's just a way to give him something to do while closing himself off from others. His drones are also there for a reason, the point of them isn't to make jokes about technology. They even have a bit of personality at times. Same with Whisper Fred, sometimes I find myself forgetting that he does podcasts instead of it just being the way he speaks normally. So yeah, there is modern technology in the show, but it's not something they use for jokes or references. It's just there because that's the modern world we live in. And if memory serves, I don't think there's a single episode related to apps or phone or even technology in general. Hazel touches grass and like us weirdos watching cartoons made for children. Now with the overall writing part out of the way, we're getting to the second best thing about the writing for me, which is the comedy. Now, I'm not exactly sure how to describe the comedy of the show. One of the many downsides of not having read anything about media analysis as an adult. The best I could describe it is that it's a kind of comedy that's less about setting up a joke and delivering its punchline, and more about characters being their silly selves and their charm makes you laugh. So in a way, I guess you could say the show is more fun than it is funny, if that makes sense. And that's not to say the show doesn't have any jokes, but it feels like most of the comedy comes from the characters being themselves, which I enjoy a lot. Honestly, I'd much rather have a show with less jokes and incredibly fun character interactions than a show that has everything going for it but tries way too hard with its shitty comedy based on characters being stupid and making dumb faces to the point of ruining the show. Yes, I'm looking at you, Center World. But anyways, yeah, I do find the show very funny, but I feel like most of it comes from the characters being charming dorks. So if you don't like the characters, you probably won't like the comedy. Now, like I said, there are regular jokes, which I would say I enjoy for the most part, though not all of them land for me, but hey, that's just how comedy works. There are also a few forceful breaks, all of which I find hilarious. It's probably helped by the fact that there's only like 5 or 6 of them throughout the show, so it's more of a fun surprise when it happens rather than the show feeling way too meta for its own good. Likewise, there are a handful of pop culture references, again not a lot, or at the very least if there's more than a few I did not recognize them. And again, since there isn't a lot and they're usually short, it works. Although they make a reference of the Turf Wizard series, which, as funny as it is to have Cosmo of all people make that reference as he's a male character who canonically has an uterus, you know, like a trans man, it also sucks to see this series still being referenced in 2024. Just let it fade into obscurity, guys, at least until its creator stops getting money for it. But other than that, the pop culture references are fine. And finally for the writing, the absolute best part of the show for me, the characters. This is by far my favorite thing about the show, and given this is a mainly episodic show meaning it needs good characters to carry it, it's a good thing they'll let it. Hazel is an absolute delight of a protagonist. She's incredibly fun, sweet and endearing, and I love following her adventures as she tries to find herself. Also, I mentioned it earlier, but I'm pretty sure she's autistic. Like, even if it wasn't confirmed, there's just too much for it to be a coincidence. Or it's another Doofenshmirtz situation where the creator wasn't diagnosed when making the character but put a lot of themselves in it, which many recognize as neurodivergent traits. But yeah, Hazel has a special interest for rocks. In the third episode we learn she likes structured places, which is even brought back later on. She's not great socially, being afraid to approach people and overthinking some of her interactions, with an episode even being about her wanting her friends to know everything about her to make things easier. She loves fries, which can come up as a comfort food, and in another episode dislikes something for having too many flavors, which can come up as overstimulation. She has Steam toys on her backpack, which Cosmo and Wanda use as a cover. The adults tell her that she's mature for her age. In episode 3 she struggles to come up with with a wish on the fly or when given vague instructions. Her big issue throughout the show is the struggles to accept change. She arguably has a bit of a black and white mentality in how she immediately clocks Dev as somewhat of an enemy, though at the same time good on her for recognizing a bully and standing up for herself and saying it's arguable. In one episode, she suddenly loves hat and you just know she's going to wear that thing for 3 days before putting it in the drawer and forgetting about it for weeks, then look at it again, wear it for a day, put it back in the drawer and repeat that cycle again in a few months. And finally, she has a bit of a temper and her outbursts have to do with a change of plan like her friends cancelling on her, or her first friends not wanting to do what she's used to do with her brother. I especially want to highlight the last part about her temper because that's something I really like about her character. Given she's meant to be sweet and kind, her temper is a good way to give her a flaw without coming out of left field. That's not to say she's never selfish, she's still a kid after all and also everyone can be selfish at times, but her having a temper never clashes with her being kind at heart. Another reason why I like her temper so much is that, for lack of a better term, when I look at Hazel, instead of thinking oh she's quirky, my first thought is oh she's autistic, and that's such an important difference for me. In recent years we've had this whole thing about quirky characters, which is basically characters taking what is considered the fun and enduring trait of neurodivergence while pushing on the side the negative traits, which isn't great, especially when some disabilities like BPD or SPD are still demonized like crazy. And that's what I like about Hazel having a temper. She's not quirky, she's autistic, she got the good just as much as she got the bad. She can be loud, she sometimes says uncomfortable things in social situations or screw herself over to avoid interacting with new people. She sometimes jumps to conclusions which can hurt both her and other people. She can get angry and lash out when the schedule is thrown off. She's not just shy or awkward or silly, she's flawed, and I love this. Last thing about Hazel, there's a bit of an argument on whether or not she qualifies for Fairly Oddparents, and I think the story makes it work. She's the kind of person who gets into her own head very easily, so her needing some guidance on how to process two situations makes sense. That being said, I don't see her needing fairies for as long as someone like Timmy, not by a long shot. Like obviously New Wish should have a season 2, and I could even buy the show having a third season with the same configuration, but if we get a fourth season with Hazel as a protagonist and still having a fairies, yeah, unless something very bad happens in her life, I won't buy it. So yeah, I think her having fairies works, but I'm not expecting her to have them for more than like 2 years. Speaking of fairies, let's move on to the other characters, and hopefully it'll be shorter. First we have Cosmo and Wanda. Starting with Cosmo, as someone who didn't particularly like him in the original show, I am baffled by how much I love him here. He's straight up my favorite character, which I was not expecting. He's still an idiot, but not to the point of being unable to function. He feels like an actual adult here. I'd even go as far as to say that I could genuinely see this version of Cosmo take care of a gold child on his own, while in the original this guy cannot be left alone with a kid for more than 10 minutes. But yeah, Cosmo in New Wish is just so endearing. He's trying his best, be nice to him. Also, he absolutely loves his wife, which is an amazing change of pace. Again, those two are adorable. He's also such a dad, I love it. I need this man to adopt Dev. The only thing missing about Cosmo for me is his sassiness. In the original show, when Cosmo was salty, he was salty, and it was very funny to watch. I really wish we had at least one moment of him being sassy in New Wish, but other than that, they fixed this man and I'm genuinely impressed by how much more likable they made him. As for Wanda, she's still the more responsible one, but with Cosmo being smarter and Hazel not making the stupidest decisions, she's allowed to be a lot more silly and it's very entertaining. Also, I love how dramatic she can be sometimes. To be honest, I really don't have much to say about Wanda. She's very silly and fun while still being the voice of reason and I love her for it. She's great. Then you have Perry, who I'm not going to say much in this section because spoilers, but just so you know, he's a realistic depiction of a young adult who very recently left the nest and is doing his first job and I find that very entertaining. He's an anxious mess, someone help him. Dev is another character I'll talk more about in the spoiler section. For the episodic side of the show, he's basically a bully who likes to show up unprompted to make Hazel insecure, causing her to make wishes. And honestly, for a bully character, he's pretty fun, probably because he acts the way you would expect a kid his age to act. Plus the show doesn't let him get away with his shit, which is nice. So yeah, he's a great foil for this side of the show. Another character I'm keeping for the spoiler section is his father, Dale Dimadome, who I'm just going to say here is a great character. He's such a piece of shit, I love him. Continuing on with the human characters, we have Hazel's parents, Marcus and Angela, both of which I absolutely adore. They're such loving parents trying their best, you can't help but love them. Also, I think Marcus might be autistic. In one episode, he gets excited while talking about something he likes and ends up speaking louder and louder until Angela tells him to quiet down. And in another episode, we see him freak out about Hazel being a minute late, on top of calculating exactly how long it would take him to pick her up and wanting to leave on the exact minute. And I know those are only 2 examples, but those moments are so specific that they really make him come off as autistic. The one about him talking loud in particular, like I've been there, both in Marcus and Angela's position. plus he's seen as a weirdo dork in general, which further fuels this idea. Moving on, we have the reporter Tina Turner, who I find to be a very fun minor character. I like her appearances. Same with Hazel's teacher, Mr. Guzman. He's such a sweet guy trying to teach those kids the best he can while sometimes trying to be hip and failing. I love him. At school there's also Krantz, the principal. She plays the role of a minor antagonist and the main one Hazel has to deal with at school, since Dev is more of a jerk messing with her than an actual antagonist, and I really like her role. She brings a bit of spice to that side of the plot. As for the fairy characters, there's a lot of one-offs that I won't get into for now. I'll just say that I don't particularly dislike any of them, except for one which I'll briefly explain in the spoiler sections, just so that for the most part, these characters fulfill their role well and can be very fun. There's a bunch of one-off characters for the human plot as well, which I'll get into when talking about each episode individually. One fairy I can talk about is Jorgen, who I don't really know what to say about. I mean, he's Jorgen. He's a strict boss with a soft spot and was secretly a huge dork. I like him. He was a good character in the original and continues to be a great character here. Also want to bring up Puppet Hazel or whatever her name is. I love that fucking thing. It's not exactly a character per se, but I don't care. Look at her. Genuinely, she's a great addition to the cast. Now, you might have noticed that in all this praise for the character writing, there's one last bunch of human characters I have yet to talk about, and that's because this is the one part where the show falls short for me. I'm talking about the school kids as I call them, aka Hazel's classmates. Those characters have nothing going on, they just exist. And with two of them being Hazel's best friends who get a lot of screen time, the fact they're so underdeveloped sucks. Jasmine is a nice girl and sometimes the show brings up that she likes to sing but is bad at it. That's it. Winnie is a cool one who is also nice. They have purple hair and pronouns, which isn't a personality trait. That's it. And outside of them, the other characters are a whole bunch of nothing. Hell, in one episode there's a list of kids' names and the writer gave up halfway through. Bev is a girl who likes to kick soccer balls. The joke is that she calls it football instead of soccer. I'm not American, so to me there's nothing wrong with the way she calls it. There's that one kid Dev introduces as his friend, but we never see them hang out or see that kid do anything for that matter. He's a silent background character. Same with the Muslim girl, she's just there. Jenkins has like one line of dialogue in an episode that is supposed to be centered around him before going back to the Shadow Realm. Whisper Fred is... Okay, I'll admit I really like Whisper Fred, he's got some pretty funny lines. But still, he's the guy doing ASMR, that's it. Hazel's classmates are really nothing but random gimmicks, and with how much time we spend at the school, it really sucks. Could also explain why the best episodes are the ones focused on Dev, since he's the most developed kid outside of Hazel. That being said, there's something in the season finale that really makes me hope we'll get to learn more about Win and Jasmine, because those two desperately need some character work. But yeah, outside of the school kids, the major characters of the show are all amazing and lovable, making for a very enjoyable viewing experience. And with all of that out of the way, this is pretty much all I could say about the show without spoiling the story. Overall, an incredibly fun and wholesome show that I highly recommend. Again guys, it's fairly short and we needed to do well on Netflix to get a season 2. Now onto the spoiler section to delve more into the story and some of its characters. And for those who don't want to be spoiled, this is basically where you should stop, so thanks for watching this review and bye! For the others...
Hey kid, I'm Pooh. Well, at least I was. I changed my name to Perry.
So first off, before getting into the plot and characters, I'm going to develop what I couldn't in the spoilers-free part. And yeah, I won't repeat what I already said, so I'm afraid that if you want a full review with spoilers, you gotta listen to the first half of the video. But anyways, starting with the writing being very clever at times, a good example of that is how Cosmo and Wanda talk to Hazel like one would with a child since that's what she is, yet at no moment does it feel like they see her as their daughter. And at the same time you have Perry who is an adult and in several instances Cosmo and Wanda talk to him like one would with an adult, yet you can tell he's their son. Now of course you have scenes that make it very explicit he's their son, but still. Just the fact they can write Cosmo and Wanda as mentors for Hazel without making them act like her parents is very good writing. Another example of good writing I forgot to mention earlier is in Teacher's Pal with how Cosmo and Wanda go about the wish. They know from the get-go that Hazel needs friends her age, and as a result use the wish as a learning experience for her, and I really like that. And outside of those two examples, there's a lot of very good decisions for how to write the characters and stories in general. Continuing with the stuff I couldn't develop and kind of flipping from saying the writing is good to saying it's bad, the two episodes I mentioned as having terrible pacing are Battle of the Dimsonian and the finale Battle of Big Wand. Kind of funny how both battle episodes go too fast, and also don't feature much of a battle. Anyways, I genuinely think that Battle of the Dimsonian should have been 20 minutes long. Thing is, the scene in which Hazel and Dev reconcile is way too short. Hazel made the wrong assumption and doesn't apologize for it. They just kind of brush off the whole argument and it sucks. It also makes Dev's change of heart come off as way too quick. Kid really spent the whole day being mad only to get over it in 10 seconds. Okay. Because of that, it makes me think the episode should have focused on this argument. But at the same time, this plot works very well not only for this resolution but also to showcase Dev and Perry's dynamic, which also needs a lot of screen time to be introduced properly. Hence me saying this episode should have been 20 minutes long. It really needed that extra time to solve Hazel and Dev's conflict properly without taking away from the Dev and Perry relationship. As for the finale, it should have been a double episode, or at the very least have the episode before it be about the takeover. That way, the finale could have started with Hazel telling her friends and brother the truth, so we can quickly get to it and have more time for Cosmo, Wanda and Perry to do more, or have longer interaction between Hazel and Dev, or even a goodbye between Dev and Perry. But I'm going to hold off talking about the finale for now and instead have it in the episode review, so this video doesn't get too long or repetitive. One last thing about it though, I think Hazel doing enough wishes to reach 1 million by the end of the season is ridiculous. You can tell they set it up in the cookie episodes, but still. If they really wanted her to have a rule-free wish, why not use a cupcake from Ava Catastrophe? I mean, Hazel mentions that she had the fairies for about a year in the finale, and maybe they need to go to Fairy World to get the cupcake, only to find out the anti-fairy took over, meaning she can grant that wish until after this whole mess is fixed. I think this makes more sense than 1 million wishes. Like 1 million is a lot. Finally, for the stuff I couldn't talk about, a small word about Hazel's brother Anthony. I like him. He's a college freshman who just got thrown into a brand new environment and is a bit of a mess, though he's trying to hide it. Again, this show is good with characters being realistic. And I like how him not remembering how to play Rattleconda Racers is another instance of Hazel getting angry because things are different. But yeah, I like Anthony. He's a sweet dude trying his best. With him now knowing about fairies, I hope he gets to befriend Perry. Granted, I'm assuming he's going back to college in a potential season 2 and will only show up from time to time, and we have no idea what Perry's going to do now, so who knows how much they'll interact. Now let's talk about some of the references, and by that I mean the characters they brought back. I want to talk about the fairy related ones first, and those are the ones I was the least impressed by. Starting with Cupid, he's the one I was talking about in the characters section when saying I dislike one of the fairies. And it's not even about his redesign. I'm not attached to his character the way other people are, so I don't care about that part. It's his attitude that bothers me. Why is this grown-ass man picking a fight with a 10 years old? Why screwing up the way her parents beat? What's the point of doing all that? So yeah, I'm not a fan of this guy. I also want to say something somewhat similar about the Tooth Fairy, but I think the issue is with the episode rather than with the character. I don't know. The whole episode is about her not listening to Hazel, which I didn't enjoy. Also, she tries on the tooth plants once and for a single day and already calls it a success, bragging much. So yeah, I don't like the way they approach her character either, though I think there's room for improvement here. Then you have Father Time, who I didn't care much about in the original, so I like his appearances. He's fine. Same with the new character Nick of Time, she does the job well. We also get to see Anti-Cosmo and Anti-Wanda in the finale, who I really wish did more than just stand there for the whole episode, but that's an issue with the finale in general. For what we see of them, there's the usual fan service, and I like how Anti-Wanda got to quote-unquote shine a little bit, since usually when those two show up it's all about Anti-Cosmo. His wife deserves some love too. Oh, and I'll get into Irep when talking about Dev and Perry. We're moving to the human characters for now. So for the human characters you have Crocker, AG and Vicky. AG, of his not full name Anthony James Jr., is the one with the least screen time out of the three, but I really like what they did with him. I'm not sure why he'd be interested in paranormal science, since I don't remember him caring much about the paranormal back in the original show, but it's still great to see him at the head of a science group like that. And you could always argue that he remembers some of the strange stuff related to Timmy from his childhood, which is where his curiosity comes from. Also, it's cute to see him and Marcus be friends. I like that for Marcus. Next, on the same episode, we have Crocker, who is the same old fairy catcher he was before. And I guess he's just allowed to know about fairies? Like he straight up saw Cosmo and Wanda and no one cared. Maybe the fairies are worried that messing with his brain further is going to make the poor guy worse, I guess. And yes, I know there's that one episode in season 7 of the original show, in which we learn that him believing in fairies is what fuels the big wand, but I don't like this part of the lore and it doesn't look like they're using it in New Wish. But anyways, I like how Crocker is portrayed, and I love his cameo in the finale, that was a good joke. That being said, one thing I dislike is the way they make him scream "Fairly Oddparents!" in a slow and drawn out way. It feels like one of those cases of the producers being like, "Hey look, he said the thing, the thing you like, he said it, it's a thing, don't you love it?" They really should have just made him say it normally. Other than that, I like what they did with him. As for Vicky, I think she might be my favorite reference other than the Jim Adams and Perry. They went with the more money-hungry side of her, which is very fitting with them keeping Dell's lemonade stand backstory. You could argue they toned down her aggressiveness, but I think it's for the best. Like I said earlier, the show is more grounded and realistic, so it makes sense for her not to go around threatening children with a chainsaw. Also, I love how they brought back the Icky Vicky song. It makes an already great scene even better. Also the scene with Cosmo and Wanda talking her down is very satisfying to see. Last random thing about Vicky, is it me or is her dress a reference to one of the Oye shorts? Because that's neat if that's the case. So yeah, love what they did with Vicky and with the characters from the original show in general. As said earlier, they did a very good job respecting the original while still putting their own spin to it. And since I'm at it, I heard about how Timmy was supposed to show up in Croc to the Future but his scene was cut, and honestly I think it's for the best. While I'm not exactly sure how I want them to bring Timmy back, that is if he had to show up to begin with, I think it would have to be a bit more special than that, like only having him, Cosmo, Wanda, Hazel and possibly Perry, instead of having him talk to a crowd without seeing them. Croc to the Future is also an episode already packed with both Crocker and AJ returning. Putting Timmy in as well would make all of their appearances less special. So ultimately I'm glad that scene got cut. And if they do show Timmy in a potential season 2, I hope it will be in a more closed-off environment with only the people who matter for it, so to speak. Now let's finally get into the actual story of this show. For context, the episodes that I consider as serialized are Fly, A New Development, Lost in Founders Day, Battle of the Dimsonian, Lost in Fairy World, Operation Birthday Take Back, Best of Luck, Fairy for a Day, and Battle of Big Wand. You could arguably add to this list Tanky Denki and Piece of Pizza since they both expand on Dev's character. And no, I'm not including the episodes introducing Jasmine and Win since they don't play a role in the overarching story outside of the finale. Same with the Cookie episode, there's continuity between them but it's not the main story. To me, the third last part of the show is focused on Hazel's friendship with Dev and their mutual interactions with Fairy World, which is what we'll get into now. Those episodes show us who Hazel is and how she got her fairies, who Dave is behind those sunglasses and what his family life looks like, how Hazel and Dev are able to start a friendship that quickly crumbles leading to Dev getting his fairy, how from that point on their friendship is filled with up and downs not helped by Dev and Perry being unable to bond, all of which leads to Dev spiraling down and becoming the villain of the finale before realizing his mistakes, and from the looks of it will likely start a better path, that is depending on what he remembers. He was wearing his sunglasses after all. Okay, so now I actually have no idea how to order this review. Thing is, I can't really do a similar review to the no spoilers one but with those episodes since a lot of the things I have to say are the same. The animation and voice acting are really good, the characters are amazing, especially Hazel and Dev, the comedy is effective, it's pretty much the same. So instead, I'm just going to expand on the characters I barely or have yet to talk about and what I like about their storylines. Basically, I'm just going to be rambling about random shit for a few minutes. This is definitely going to be shorter than the no spoiler section. Starting with our boy Dev, who is basically going to be the main thread as is probably the biggest part of the storyline of the show. Out of all the characters in the show, he's the most tropey so to speak, but that doesn't prevent him from being a great character due to how well executed his story is. Dev is a rich bully kid who has an abusive parent explaining but not justifying their actions, and who eventually warms up to the main protagonist, showing a softer side of themselves. You know this trope, you've seen this trope, it's literally everywhere. Hell, it was even done in the original show, including that kid having a godparent. So Dev starts off as this bully who shows up randomly on his drone to talk shit about Hazel before leaving. So see, he just pops out of nowhere, it's kind of funny when you watch those moments back to back. But soon enough you meet his dad and suddenly everything makes sense and his character becomes a lot sadder. Then he befriends Hazel, things go wrong after a while, he gets his fairy, and you have what I said earlier about him spiraling into villainy. Now one thing I really like about Dev and his story is how the show never seems to forget that he's a 10-year-old child. It really adds to the realism of the situation, as again this show is pretty grounded when it comes to the characters in particular, and as a result the effect Del's abuse has on Dev is depicted in a realistic way, and him acting like an actual child really adds to it as well. Again, the best part of the show for me is its characters, and that's where the writing is at its best as well. To explain in more detail what I mean by Dev acting like a 10-year-old, you have his general attitude when bullying Hazel for starters. He just shows up, says something mean and leaves. It's very childish in how he approaches it. In a way, he's a bit of a stereotypical jerk but not to the extent of starting physical altercations, while outside of that scene in the first episode with him throwing a kid in a locker. We get to see that childish side of him when being a jerk especially well whenever he's with Irep, wishing for things like being king of the world and renaming Fairy World after him, or giving every kid their own anti-fairy. Hell, in general in the finale, he doesn't want to hurt fairies, he straight up says he only wanted to imprison Cosmo, Wanda, Perry and Jorgen, aka the only fairies he knows. Also the way he laughs when hearing about magical backup before realizing it's deadly. Yes, that's pretty much how I'd expect a kid to react when being told fairy blow up into confetti. He's really just a hurt child acting out in this whole finale. Then you have his reactions when Hazel tries to befriend him. Turns out it's very easy to take down his walls because he's a literal child seeking positive attention. Likewise, his father's words immediately make him turn around and not want to continue the treasure hunt, parroting what Del said. And in general, the way he often struggles to articulate his issues is very realistic too. Again, he's a young kid living with a father who never pays any attention to him and makes minimum effort for him to the point of hiring his former abuser for Dev's birthday party. And yet Dev takes example after the only close adult in his life and how he's being treated by him. It's not like Rocker's mom in Fairly Oddparents who straight up admits she's feeling empty due to her son hating her because she's old enough to understand her own feelings. We're talking about a young kid here. So he struggles to speak his mind, and when things go bad he shuts down and assumes the worst, pushing people away before they can hurt him. Again, this is how you'd expect someone in this situation to act, especially a young child, and I love that this is what we got with Dev. On top of that, I love that the show doesn't let him get away with his worst behavior. Now, I do hope he at least remembers the finale since he was wearing glasses, because that's a lot of character development to take away from him. But yeah, I really like that admitting his mistakes and apologizing doesn't mean he won't get the punishment of losing his fairy. And speaking of Dev doing something that leads to punishment, I really like how in Operation Birthday Take Back, he tries to save Hazel from Vicky despite Hazel herself telling him to get their fairies. What I like about it is that, back in Lost and Founders Day, him trying to save Hazel is what led to a big argument. So it's very sweet to see that even though the last time Dev tried to help Hazel he got hurt, he still takes that risk a second time. It's also a good reminder that he's a good person despite his shortcomings. Like for the other major characters, absolutely amazing character work right here. And since I'm at it, I guess I can say a few words about Dev and Hazel's friendship. I think what I find the most interesting about it is that they're not actually that close, all things considered. At the beginning of the show, Dev was bullying Hazel, causing her to clock him as an enemy day one, which honestly good for her. Just because someone has a shitty time doesn't make it okay for them to abuse you. But even after a new development, we don't see them hang out at school. We do see Dev go around without his sunglasses, because his sunglasses basically represent him putting his walls up, and Hazel is supportive of him at the beginning of Lost and Founders Day, but other than that, they don't interact at school. Then they have a big blow up, and then they make up in Battle of the Dimsonian, which as I said before is a scene I find way too short. The thing is, I don't blame Hazel for how she reacts at the end of Lost and Founders Day. Dev has been bullying her for a while, and again we don't see them interact at school, so I can understand Hazel assuming the worst of him. That being said, she made no effort to listen to Dev, barely letting him get a word in. On top of that, the things she said very much come off as her ending their friendship. But in Battle of the Dimsonian, none of this comes up. Hazel just says that friends argue sometimes, and then we move on to getting rid of the spirit. Hazel doesn't acknowledge she was wrong for how she acted, she doesn't apologize to him, she just kind of brushes it off, and Dev is incredibly quick to agree to make up. Again, this episode should have been 20 minutes long, if only for that scene. I'm not going to say this scene ruins their character work or anything, but it's definitely frustrating. But yeah, after this scene, I do like how things evolved. We have Lost in Fairy World in which they get to hang out and have fun, which is adorable. Same with the new development, by the way. Seeing them have fun is incredibly cute. And I love seeing Dev walk around with a huge grin and without his sunglasses for once. It's very sweet. But anyways, they hang out in Fairy World, we see Hazel give him the best gift she could have thought of for his birthday in Operation Birthday Take Back. But then Dev learns about both his father's plan and the original wish that led to him and Hazel work together for the school hunt, which completely breaks him. And from then on, we go back to him bullying her, which I'll be honest kinda comes off as the show trying to remain somewhat episodic. After what they went through together, it feels weird to see Dev act the exact same as he did before their friendship, especially when Best of Luck shows how Dev can be antagonistic toward Hazel while still acknowledging how they got to this point. I don't know, it's always fun to see Dev be an immature little shit, but there's definitely a bit of a dichotomy here. In any case, by the end of the day I really like the relationship between those two. I know I'm repeating myself a lot, but it feels very realistic. They're not besties, they're sort of friendish, making it easy for things to go wrong between them given how much Dev is hurting. I also love how in the end Hazel accepts Dev's apology, but seems like she'd rather keep her distance from him as of now. It's very well written. And since I'm a fandom person, for the $100 question, do I ship those two? I'm going to say both yes and no. I definitely find them to be adorable together, but I'm not really one to ship children character, it's just not my thing. It's not a question of me finding ships between kids uncomfortable or anything like that, I just don't find myself interested in ships between kids, unlike the way I can obsess over a ship between adult characters. Also, Hazel doesn't seem all that interested in relationships, and we as a society should learn to let people live their life without romance being shoved down their throats constantly. That being said, I really like the idea of Dev having a bit of a one-sided crush on Hazel due to her being the first person to befriend him. It's a cute idea. Now moving on from cute to fucked up, let's talk about Del Dimadome. Del is an absolute sack of shit and I fucking love it. They took a character with 1 minute of screen time, made the situation even worse than it already was by making it so that he was working as Vicky's slave for 7 years, and then use him as a way to show how some victims of abuse can become abusers themselves. I'm actually not going to delve into it much because this isn't my analysis, it comes from several posts I've seen on Tumblr, but many people have pointed out how the show doesn't seem to hide away from acknowledging that Del was abused. For example, his weird reaction when Hazel tells him about the treasure hunt giving tickets to the water park. Or in general, I've seen several people interpret his fear of losing money as him being terrified of losing everything and ending back to where he was as a kid, rather than it being the stereotypical greedy billionaire way to act. Again, I'm not going to go deeper into this, but it's a very interesting way to see his character, and if that was the intention, I love that the show wasn't afraid to go there. Del's previous abuse isn't just some silly backstories they kept for shock value or to justify him being a villain, it has a genuine effect on how he acts as an adult. I love that read of his character and really hope it was intentional. That being said, I don't want his past to be used as some sub-story to potentially redeem him. If anything, I want to see this man get worse. I love watching him act as a villain. He's very cunning and manipulative, but also kind of pathetic at times, which is funny. I just really like Dale as an antagonist. Hope we see more of it in a potential season 2. And since we're on the villains, let's talk about Irep, formerly known as Foop in the original show. First things first, his design is peak, and I'm saying that unironically. From what I remember of the original show, Foop isn't a character you're meant to take seriously, so going into New Wish I was really hoping at least one part of his body would still be a square, and it did not disappoint. Look at him, he looks absolutely ridiculous, it's the best. And outside of the design, I really like what they did with him personality wise. He's a gremlin who's just here to cause chaos and have fun. When Dev tells him how much better he finds him compared to Perry, he starts weeping because he literally spent his entire life comparing himself to his fairy counterpart. I could see some people being annoyed that Irep isn't as smart as he used to be as a baby, but I think it's fine. And I love how he acts like an immature adult the same way Perry does. On that note, I love Irep in the finale. Dude just vibing and living his best life, good for him. I don't have much else to say about him, he's a fun addition. Definitely different than how he was in the original show, but it's a change I'm in for. Oh yeah, one thing I find funny is how much he seems to hate his name change. Dude, if you want to be Foop, just be Foop. Stop making everything about your fairy counterpart, be your own person. As much as you can be your own person as an anti-fairy at least. And speaking of Irep's fairy counterpart, let's talk about the one character the internet went crazy for, our boy Perry, aka Poof, but he has anxiety now. To be honest, I can understand the hype, he's a very likable character. Like I said earlier, he's the definition of a 20-something on his first job right after leaving his parents' house, and I love it. First day on the job and he's already exhausted. When things get difficult, he crashes at his parents' place, and despite very clearly being an adult that's trying very hard to be taken seriously, he has a lot of moments where he acts immature, on top of clearly not having a lot of experience for the job, at least for the emotional part of it. Like obviously growing up he got used to grant Timmy's wishes, but his parents were the one doing all the emotional labor, or even doing the talking in general. I actually like to think that this is why in Lost in Fairy World, Cosmo and Wanda keep talking over him. That's just how it was with Timmy, and having all children around brought this habit back. On that note, I love that Perry has a good relationship with his parents. Even in this episode in which he gets frustrated by them, it's still obvious how much he loves and cares about them. And the next time we see them all together in Operation Birthday Take Back, they respect him as a godparent and he's clearly happy about it. It's very sweet to see a young adult have a healthy relationship with his parents, even if that relationship isn't perfect. The important part is that they're listening to their son and respect who he wants to be as an adult. And speaking of Cosmo and Wanda, I'm very amused by the fact that, while he's supposed to be the smart one, Perry clearly takes after Cosmo the most. He has his mother's brain and flair for the dramatic, but everything else is from Cosmo, I love it. But of course, I can't talk about Perry without mentioning his godparenting relationship with Dev. And the short version is that I love just how flawed this relationship is, on both sides. And I believe there are three main reasons for why this relationship is such a mess. First, Perry is way too immature and inexperienced for this child. All he does as a godparent is granting Dev's wishes, except Dev is a spoiled kid who already has drones to get him anything he wants. What he needs is an adult he can rely on to take care of his emotional needs, and Perry just doesn't understand that. Also, Perry really doesn't have the best priorities. Like in Battle of the Dimsonian, he tells Dev to give the staff back to the spirit, not to keep Dave safe, but because he doesn't want his parent to see that his first got killed and ended up killed. Like Perry, buddy, your priority should be your child's safety, not what your parents think of you. Best of Luck is by far the best example of Perry being immature. He gets in a dumb fight with a 10 years old and quits because things are getting difficult, only to come back later and take back his place as if nothing happened. As a reminder, Dev is a troubled child who needs stability in his life. What Perry did here is not it. Also, when coming back, Perry makes it more about beating Irep than taking care of Dev. Plus, Perry's dialogue implies that he knew Irep was lurking around, yet he still let him have Dev. Not only that, but Irep made Dev feel like he was at the top of the world, only to have it all taken away. And instead of comforting Dev afterwards, Perry goes on to hang out with his parents. Like, I love Perry as much as the next guy, but you have to admit he really messed up in this episode. At the same time, I don't want to fully blame Perry since he's a new recruit. If anything, the Fairy Council or Jorgen or whoever assigns Fairy to God Kids are the one at fault for giving such a difficult case to a complete newbie. So both Perry and Dev got screwed over by the system here. But at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that Perry's immaturity is an issue for Dev. As a reminder, Perry is the adult in this relationship. Which brings me to the second reason why those two don't work, Dev can't take Perry seriously. Thing is, Dev can't bond with his fairy properly unless he respects said fairy. And given the kind of person Dev is, he needs someone with some level of authority for him to respect them. And Perry is the furthest thing away from that. Just look at the moments in which Dev raises his voice and Perry just shrinks. How is someone like Dev supposed to take Perry seriously when he crumbles so easily? And what is this reaction even about? Why is the all-powerful fairy afraid of a 10 years old? Who hurt you, Perry? And on top of Perry letting Dev run the show, you have Cosmo and Wanda who, as sweet as their interaction with their son are, these two also have no issues getting embarrassingly mushy with him in front of the god kids, and I wouldn't be surprised if this made it harder for Dev to see Perry as an authority figure. I mean, even with how silly they are, Cosmo and Wanda still feel like actual adults. Meanwhile, Perry tries so hard to be taken seriously, yet still feels like a kid at times. That's actually another example of clever writing I forgot to mention earlier. And when Dev has this supposed to be an adult fairy being talked to like a child by those other clearly adult fairies, it's hard to take Perry seriously. Then you also have Perry's moments of immaturities, like the argument in Best of Luck in which Perry getting on Dev's role probably hurt his credibility. There's also the scene with Vicky in Operation Birthday Take Back in which Dev is clearly afraid, yet Perry fails to protect him because he's equally terrified of Vicky, so he hides behind his parents instead. And while I don't blame Perry for his reaction since he's clearly traumatized by Vicky, how do you explain this to Dev? Third and lastly, something I'm actually shocked the show never points out, Dev and Perry have completely opposite family lives, which probably makes it very hard for Perry to relate to Dev, on top of Dev potentially getting jealous of his fairy. On one hand, you have a kid constantly seeking out the attention of his neglectful father, and on the other hand, you have a fairy constantly wanting less attention from his loving parents. The fact the show never pointed out that parallel is crazy. Even in the finale, Cosmo and Wanda spend the entire episode caring for their son's well-being even when their world is falling apart. Meanwhile, Dale can't even take a second to check if his son is fine after trampling him over. So while it's not something the show pays attention to, I think this difference in situations could be another way those two struggle to connect. Perry can't understand some of Dev's issues, while Dev gets to see his fairy have the one thing he wishes he had. So to make a conclusion on Dev and Perry, those two are struggling and it makes for a great and entertaining dynamic that I hope we'll get to see more of. As to how they could get better, with Dev's character development he might grow to become nicer to his fairy, while Perry needs to be more understanding of the child issues and also loosen up a little bit. I mean, we see when he's with his parents that Perry can be silly, but with Dev he's constantly trying to be professional. Perry needs to learn to let loose when the kid too, that being friendly with your child and forming a genuine connection is also part of the job. And one last thing about that whole good parenting situation, while I'm more than happy with the pairings we have and don't want to change it at all, I can't help but wonder how things would be if Hazel and Dev were to switch fairies. And the thing is, I think it might be better for everyone involved. Again, that doesn't mean I want it to happen, but I think it might solve a few issues, which is also why I don't want it to happen since the show needs conflict. But yeah, with Hazel and Perry, Hazel is a much easier child for a beginner like him, making it easier for them to connect, on top of making it easier for Perry to realize part of the job is to be a friend for the kid. There's also the fact that Hazel's main issue is that she misses her older brother who is around the same age as Perry. Plus Perry knows what it's like to say goodbye to your older sibling, so he can relate to Hazel and better guide her in how she feels. As for Dev, Cosmo and Wanda, those two have a lot more experience and probably dealt with a lot of neglected kids already. They can deal with someone like Dev, especially Cosmo. In Operation Birthday Take Back, he was able to make that boy smile very easily where Perry constantly failed. And in the finale, he's the one pointing out that what Dev wants can be wished by a fairy. Like, can Cosmo adopt this child already? That being said, Cosmo still needs Wanda for help since Perry's tendency to be afraid of Dev is something he takes from his dad, so Cosmo needs Wanda to call Dev out when he tries bossing them around. Going back to them being a good match, there's obviously the fact Dev needs a parental figure, which two middle-aged parents can give much more easily than their fresh out of college son. And on top of that, Cosmo and Wanda have complicated family lives, on top of both having only one parent like Dev does, so it's easier for them to relate to him. And with that configuration in mind, I can't help but wonder what such a show would look like, in which Perry is Hazel's godparent while Dev eventually gets Cosmo and Wanda. Again, I'm not saying this is what I want to see happen, I'm just curious about the what if. I think it would be an interesting way to take things, having the new show with both a new protagonist and a new fairy, since Perry is basically a new character. Plus it would give character development to the fairy, since admittedly Cosmo and Wanda don't have an arc in this show, they're just vibing, which I love by the way. I also can't help but wonder how much the show will change with that switch. Like I think the episodic side will be very different since Perry is a lot more focused on sticking to the rules. But for the serialized side, I feel like everything up to the ending of Operation Birthday Take Back will be similar, though I do wonder how this version of Lost in Fairy World would go, since in this timeline we would have seen how Perry is as a godparent, which might make him appear more justified in his frustration and desire to do things his way. I don't know, it could be interesting. On that note, I think it would be very funny in this timeline if Perry was introduced as Perry, not as Poof, with the promotions for the show calling him a new character. And then we spend the first half of the show with him supposedly being a new character, though some people will probably catch on to the fact he might be Poof, especially if he mentions coming from a family of godparents, with others debating he could be related to Wandesimo or something. Then we get to this version of Battle of the Dimsonian, and that one scene where everyone says each other's name is the scene revealing that this new fairy is, in fact, Poof. I think it'd be funny. And while in a way I feel the same for the show we got, at the same time Perry introducing himself as Poof is one of the reasons why his introduction is so iconic in my opinion. Just the fact that we know he's Poof brings interest to the character, so I'm glad they didn't hide that fact. And one last small thing about this quote-unquote alternative timeline, I can't help but wonder if the possibility was brought up when making the show, but they decided to go with Cosmo and Wanda regardless. Or maybe Nickelodeon pushed back on it because they wanted Cosmo and Wanda as the main fairies, or they feared that a new fairy couldn't carry the show, let alone one as controversial as Spoof. After all, the way it was written makes me think the people behind the show liked him, but he doesn't have that much screen time all things considered. But again, and I can't say this enough, I am talking about all of this as more of a writing exercise than anything else. I'm fully content with the show we got, and I love the characters dynamic we have from the choice of godparents New Wish went with, and I wouldn't change a thing about it. This alternative idea is just some food for thought. And with all of that said, if I had to give a short but global conclusion of this show, Fairly Oddparents A New Wish is a really good show that manages to almost flawlessly update the original Fairly Oddparents, while still putting its own spin to it and being respectful of the source material. And if you enjoy the original show, I can't recommend it enough. Again, it's only around 5 hours long and it needs a rating to get a second season, which the writers clearly planned for. It's both a fun episodic show and an interesting serialized story with amazing characters, good animation, and really solid writing that's really worth the watch. And before we move to the giving my short opinion on each episode, a small word about the few things I'm hoping for if we get a season 2. I basically want 4 things. First, Win and Jasmine need to be fleshed out, especially now that I know about Cosmo and Wanda there's no excuse to keep them so underdeveloped. Second, I need Dev and Perry to get back together as godparent and godchild. I don't know if they would have Dev remember because he was wearing sunglasses, if Perry will argue with Jorgen to get the kid back, or if Perry will stay with Hazel or be some babysitter to keep an eye on Dev, but I really want those two to reunite at some point, like halfway to the season or something. Third, I need Dale as the main antagonist of the season, especially if we're not getting a third season. I need to see this man at his worst. Preferably with Dev having an internet conflict between wanting to make his dad happy and wanting to protect Hazel and the fairies. And for those thinking Dale is too weak when compared to magical beings, in the show's Bible they mention him teaming up with the Pixies, which I think will make for an amazing finale. Though maybe don't have them take over Fairy World because that'd be redundant. Instead, maybe do something more related to Dale wanting to steal the fairies' magic and monetize it, which in a way would parallel Nectar of the Odds. Heck, maybe his memories of this day will make him realize Timmy had fairies, meaning it's possible to make a profit out of them. It would also fit very well with the Pixies being all about business. But yeah, I just really want to see Dale as the main antagonist. He has a lot of potential. And fourth, the last thing I'd want out of a second season is more information as to how Cosmo, Wanda and Perry feel about losing Timmy. And I'm not even asking for Timmy to show up, I'd actually be fine if he never does and just keeps hunting the narrative from the side, but I just want to know how the fairies feel. We already know Cosmo and Wanda retired after Timmy for 10,000 years, which isn't nothing, but I want to know more. How did they feel about the separation? How did they explain to a 7-year-old Perry that his brother was going to forget all about him and then never see each other again? Hell, is that one of the reasons why Perry struggles to connect with Dev? Because he doesn't want to get too close to a kid only to lose them? I just need to know more about how losing Timmy affected the two of them. Now with all of this out of the way, let's get to very short reviews of each episode, just giving my general opinion on them. There's going to be a few repetitions from what I said before, but not much as I want to keep this part short. Fly is such a good introduction to this series. We open with Hazel and get plenty of time to learn who she is. The fact she's new is also a good way to quickly introduce the other school kids in that scene with Dev. Also Dev himself has a great introduction, love the reference. And Cosmo and Wanda, my god Cosmo and Wanda in this episode. The scene at the end where they try to bring Hazel back is so good. And I love how well they bounce off of each other. Wanda struggling to act human, leading Cosmo to hurry up, Cosmo crying about the fly trap and Wanda immediately catching on and using the distraction. Even the scene when they show up at the door is great. This episode is an amazing introduction to the series. We meet the main character, get a good idea of who they are and what their dynamic will be, and see what kind of show it's going to be. Really solid stuff. The only big complaint I have is the way Cosmo and Wanda go back to being fairies. I would have liked it more if they just admitted who they were to Hazel, instead of basically being forced into it in some weird way. Also, it feels like they were trying to make the reveal a surprise, but also the opening team already shows who they are. And in the first scene at the Wells house, it's obvious they're not human. But again, other than that, fantastic pilot episode. The Department of Magical Violations is a fun one. We get our first proper introduction to Fairy World, Jorgen is still Jorgen and I love it, the challenges are fun, I can't say I care much about Cookie but she works well enough, and between her and Perry, Jorgen is very bad at assigning the proper fairy to a kid. I do have two issues with this episode though. First of all, the fart jokes. Like the brain fart is a smart idea on paper but it's still a fart joke. And second, that rule stating that all god kids should get what they want. Yeah, I have some questions. If the god kids are supposed to get exactly what they ask for, what about literally every other rule stating all the things the god kids can't ask for? I didn't call it out during the review because it's only in this episode and never brought up again, but still, this rule straight up breaks every other one. Honestly, I think they should have gone instead with a rule like all god kids must have the fairy best suited for their needs. Not only because it would fit perfectly with the episode, but also because I could see such a rule being brought back with Irep, since Dev sees him as a better godparent than Perry. But outside of this and the fart jokes, it's a fun episode. I really like the way Cosmo and Wanda dealt with the wish in Teacher's Pal. They know from the get-go that Hazel needs to make friends with kids her age and use the wish as a learning experience. It's a very interesting way to take the situation. Not much else to say about this one, it's fun. Also, Jasmine coming to talk to Hazel first is how I made friends as a kid too. Look, Hazel is right, meeting new people is terrifying, I don't know how others do it. A Dinosaur in Dimadelphia is my second least favorite episode. It's just a whole lot of nothing. There's a dino, he's in the present, he doesn't want to go back because he doesn't want to die, he tries looking for a job and ruins things doing so. Wow. The best part of the episode for me is the beginning with Hazel and the parents, it's incredibly cute, the rest is very boring. Fearless is a more horror-focused episode and it's a fun one, lots of cool references, including possibly My Friendly Neighborhood. On that note is the introduction of Puppet Hazel, a character I kinda love for how absurd she is. More on the episode, I like the idea that removing a fear will make it materialize as real. It reminds me of that one episode from the original show, in which Timmy wishes he had no emotions or something, and said emotion materialize and leave his brain. Here it feels like a similar concept, but with its own twist, which is neat. Now, this episode doesn't really teach us anything about Jasmine, especially since the whole point is for her to face off against her fears, meaning they are not part of her afterwards. But we do get a lot more about Hazel and her struggles with change, which is always interesting. I really like Hazel. The Wellington Hoteling Stone. Fun fact, this is the last part I'm writing and recording since the totally legal places I was just showed before it came on Netflix didn't have this one for some reason. Anyways, to keep it as short as possible so I can be done with this review, it's a fun enough episode with some good jokes. I still love Hazel, Cosmo and Wanda. Unfortunately, this episode didn't change my opinion on Jasmine and Wynn being underdeveloped, and it seems like the first hint that Dev is a miserable kid, which is interesting. 1500 Minutes of Fame is one I'm a bit more neutral about. The highlights for me are Dev getting affected by the wish, always fun to see, and the principal being a hater, which is interesting. Other than that, it's pretty average. I like the forceful break though, with the girl saying she understands all those references as a kid. As said before, this show has some very good forceful breaks. 28 Puddings Later is another one I don't have a lot to say about. It's 28 days later but with pudding. Not Timmy, it's a lot of shit in this one. We see more of Dev being Dev. To be honest, I think the reason I don't have a lot to say about those is because there isn't that much to say about the school kids. They're just kind of there while stuff happens because of Hazel. I do find the episode pretty fun though. Losing it over pudding is such a kid's thing to do. Trial and Error is one I'm not that into. I'd say it has good comedy, but then again the only joke I can think of is the forceful break, which is really funny, don't get me wrong, but there's supposed to be other jokes in there. I barely remember anything about the slapstick chase, which is not a good sign. I also don't really care about the characters that Hazel's hair becomes. I don't find her all that interesting. Also, I'm white, so take it with a grain of salt, but I guess I would have liked it more if the episode leaned onto the fact that black people don't have the same hair texture as white people, thus making it different to style. It could have been educational, so to speak, but no, instead we got a generic story about a kid learning to like the way they look. On that note, when Hazel started asking Cosmo and Wanda for help, I was like, honey, no, they're white, they have no idea what they're doing. So yeah, it has some Looney Tunes chase and a good message about liking yourself the way you are, but I'm not the biggest fan of how they went about it. Weird science is fun. I really like the logic of, well, for your project to work, we need to rewrite reality itself. It's a good way to have the episode happen without interfering with the no cheating rule, since Hazel was technically doing a contest. Also, I love Jorgen just standing there for a while before deciding to help. Like, dude, I know your job sucks, but come on. Like for the previous school-related episodes, I don't have many notes for this one, but it's very fun. Mystery She Wished is another fun one with some good character interactions. I also don't have much to say about it. I love how the new tenants are called John and Jendo, the twin twist is obvious but it works, that one scene with Cosmo and Wanda playing along is great, Hazel's parents are still fun to have around, the noir detective ambience works well, the reveal of them being the new tenants is great, it's just a fun time. For Prime Meridian Love, the fact Hazel doesn't know some of the anime references make me feel old. It's another fun one, though I don't find it as good as the previous two. The highlight for me is when we learn Dev is a dweeb. And looking at the following episodes on the list, it seemed like this was when they started focusing on who he was under that bully facade. And yeah, it works here. Other than that, not much to say. The anime boy is a fine enough character, though he doesn't do much for me. I like them bringing back the concept of animated heroes becoming real though. And like I said much earlier, I also really like seeing Hazel get angry when her friends have a change of plan. I like this is a flaw of hers. I love how when I first saw the title card for Stanky Nanky, I was like, it's just going to be constant trash jokes. And then it turned out to be one of the best serialized episodes. This is our first look at Del Dimadome and man is he a great character. Absolute piece of shit CEO, but one with a brain which makes him dangerous and I like it. Denki is also surprisingly cute. I don't know, he's probably one of my favorite one-off characters. But yeah, I really like this one. Good message, good characters, great villain, we learn more about Dev, really good stuff. Piece of Pizza is yet another one making us find out more about Dev, and thank God he does because I wouldn't care less about this one otherwise. Can't say I care much about the pizza alien guys, they sure do exist. But yeah, I really like how Hazel and Dev learn to accept each other more in this one, it's cute. Also, Cosmo does one of the most fucked up things in this show and it made me feel so bad for Dev. I really can't blame him for making pizza disappear after this one. Like seriously Cosmo, what the fuck? I know you guys had yet to learn Dev has daddy issues, but come on. A new development is possibly the cutest, most wholesome one for me. Sad montage of Hazel and Dev finding clues together and growing their friendship is just so cute. And yeah, this is the true beginning of their friendship, with Hazel even getting some insight on what Dev's family life is like, though he doesn't play much of a role since Hazel is never the one to call out how shitty Dale is. In any case, I love this one. I don't really have any notes other than it's adorable, and it is adorable, a must watch. Cookie's court is so fun. I still don't care about Cookie, and I'm honestly surprised she's making such a big deal out of not being Hazel's godparent. Like you didn't even spend a day with that girl, just get assigned to another kid and stop throwing a fit over nothing. But yeah, even with me not caring about her, this episode has a ton of funny jokes and I love it as a result. Even some visuals are fun, like the recess with Wanda being full girl boss mode, while her ugly ass groom is chilling being 5 times smaller than her, or Cosmo screaming he's not going back to jail, or basically anything about the courtroom scene honestly. Also, we learned in this episode Cosmo and Wanda are biblically accurate angels, and from the Tumblr post I read talking about this, as I don't know anything about that mythos, Cosmo is a throne while Wanda is a power, and apparently Cosmo ranks higher than Wanda, which checks out with the fact Cosmo is OP as hell. But anyway, this one's incredibly fun. Lost in Founders Day is my favorite episode of the show. It has everything. Hazel being an autistic dork learning about a cool hat and immediately wanting it. We get Cosmo and Wanda being dorks in love and also terrible at being humans. And also Cosmo reminding the audience he has an uterus. We get Dev getting some character development. We have Dale still being terrible. Even Marcus and Angela are here. And it's a 20-minute special. So yeah, I really like this one. It's both very fun and very interesting and is the best the show has to offer for me. It's also very clever how this is basically the halfway point of the show and it leads to a change of status quo with Dev getting Perry. Worker Magic is a pretty cute one. We got to see earlier how Angela is incredibly busy and ends up not having much time for Hazel, especially in trial and error, so it's great to have more focus on that. And like I said earlier, I love Angela, so I'm not complaining to see her get more screen time. And the whole thing about Hazel wanting to be a secretary just so she can spend time with her mom is very sweet. I also like how the episode took a realistic approach to the situation, not only with Beatrice having to call and quit, but also how Hazel wasn't up to the task even with Cosmo and Wanda trying to help. It's actually interesting how Hazel is called mature for her age numerous times, but whenever she tries to be involved in the adult world, she's way too incompetent and immature for it, as she should. Again, this show is very grounded and realistic despite its premise and I really like that. Croc to the Future is the episode that brings Crocker and AJ back and it's a fun time. Although I can help but wonder why the fairies just let Crocker know about them. In any case, I don't have much to say about this one. They brought Crocker back, same with the Nets neutralizing fairy magic, I really like how AJ is used and it's a fun time. Battle of the Dimsonian feels like it should have been right after Lost and Founders Day, due to everything in it having to do with that episode. The rupture of Hazel and Dev's friendship feels very recent, Perry feels like he's on his first day on the job, nothing in between those two episodes feels relevant to it. Anyways, I really enjoyed this one. Then again, all the episodes that advance the plot are really good. We get more focus on Dev and his new dynamic with Perry, and it's great in how bad it is, with Dev being a spoiled 10 years old doing spoiled 10 years old things, while Perry is more focused on making his parents proud and taking care of his god kid. On that note, what was Perry being so scared of his parents? Dude, your parents are Cosmo and Wanda, why are you so scared of them? I guess they could have changed a lot during their vacation, but still. Also, I love the scene where they reunite, both of those scenes. Now, if I had to say something negative, the resolution of Hazel and Dev's conflict is definitely a bit too short. And thinking about it, I'm a bit bothered how Dev didn't get to explain why he stole the hat, meaning that Hazel didn't apologize for making an assumption on him. If anything, it feels like Dev is the only one in the wrong here, which, yes, he is the one who escalated to the spirit situation, so he was wrong in this episode, but in Founders Day, Hazel didn't let him explain. Like, I understand why she didn't let him explain, but still, things went way too fast here, and I definitely wish this resolution was a bit longer. But other than that, really good episode. And after the horror possession episode, we get Patchy Possum's Party Playground, the horror Five Nights at Freddy's episode. I swear the second I saw it was some animatronic pizzeria I was like, yep, somebody's dying. Outside of that, it's fine. Jasmine and Win sadly still don't have much of a personality, and Patchy Possum isn't not that interesting, including her fears of being alone. I guess it's a nice message for kids, but it doesn't make for that great of an episode, especially when the first episode basically had the same message but better. Also, it's low-key taken aback at the end when Patchy loses it on Not Timmy. Meanwhile, Cosmo and Wanda have a pretty fun subplot, I guess, but yes, those two are very fun like usual, though they don't save the episode for me. A Date to Remember should have been called Marcus and the Bad Bitch He Pulled by Being Autistic. I'm actually mixed on this one. The beginning and end are incredibly sweet, and yet again I love Marcus and Angela, so it's a delight to see them be goofy on screen. Same with Cosmo and Wanda just being goofy in the background. But I just can't get into the whole Cupid part of the plot due to Cupid being an asshole. I'm also not a big fan of the whole two characters fighting for the love of a third one thing, which is probably not helped by it being two men trying to romance a woman. Like, can we stop with love corners already? They're boring at best and creepy at worst. But yeah, great for the focus on Marcus and Angela, but also Cupid's an asshole for no reason, and Angela gets objectified for most of the runtime, which is annoying, so I'm torn on this one. Like I said in the intro, Lost in Fairy World is the episode that made me want to watch the show due to the dynamic between Cosmo, Wanda and Perry, and even after watching the whole thing, it's still one of my favorite episodes. Now, I've made a very long Tumblr post going into detail as to why I love this dynamic so much, so go read that if you're curious. But to talk about the episode as a whole, I feel like we just get to see characters' dynamic and how they're going to play out going forward, at least if we get Hazel and Dev as friends again in a potential season 2. We see Dev and Hazel hang out more as friends and how they can influence each other, and we get to see Cosmo, Wanda and Perry catch up and how their relationship will be going forward, with Perry loving his parents but wanting them to see him as an adult, but also having to learn that he shouldn't be ashamed to ask for their help. Again, I could say more, but it's all on Tumblr already. This video is getting long, so let's move on. I'll be honest, I kind of forgot about the Trouble with Rivals. Again, the school-related episodes don't have that much going on due to underdeveloped Hazel's classmates are. So yeah, this one is about Hazel having to choose which band she wants to be a part of, and then meeting the music fairy, and then uniting everyone at the end. Really not much to say on this one. It's a pretty fun time and I wouldn't call it bad by any means, but there's better episodes. I do really enjoy the music fairy. The way she talks is cringy, but also feels like she's making fun of it, so I both love and hate it. Rat Alconda Racers is cute. While Anthony doesn't have the most developed personality, I really like that we get to finally see him given how often Hazel talked about him. I also really like how he's a bit of a mess as he just left for college and is away from his family for the first time. It makes him realistic. What is not realistic, however, is how quick he is to accept that he's in a game, but that was pretty funny to be honest. And speaking of funny, Wanda was so over the top in this one and I love it. Stop telling her to shut up, guys, let her go wild. Just because she didn't make being an actress a profession like her sister did doesn't mean she can't act. But anyways, yeah, really fun and cute one. And like I said earlier, I really like how Hazel gets frustrated because things are different. Me too, girl. Also, the picture of Anthony and the girl he likes being in a fountain made the Devzol shippers go wild. Dig a little deeper? Yeah, this is the worst episode of the whole season for me. Interesting premise, and it's cute to delve into Hazel's special interest, but the execution is terrible. I usually like puns, but those ones suck. The rock people are incredibly boring. Cosmo and Wanda lose their wands in the stupidest way. The comedy in general is far from my favorite in the show, even outside of the puns. This one was a miss for me. Pot-Hazel is a weird one, and I don't mean the whole potato Hazel thing. I just don't know how I feel about this one. I think it has to do with what I said earlier about the new fairies being used for some wishes. It's a cool idea, and in that case I really like Mother Nature's design, but it's just not my thing. So I guess I think it's a good episode, well written and with a nice message, but as a personal preference, I'm not that into it. Operation Birthday Take Back is my third favorite episode. I really like the serialized side of this show. Anyways, I feel like there's a lot to say about this one, and I'm not sure how to phrase my thoughts on it coherently, so I'm just going to make a list of all the things I want to say. Cosmo being able to cheer up Dev at the very beginning makes me a bit emotional, and really makes me think Cosmo and Wanda will be better godparents for Dev, especially Cosmo. I love how the second the god kids are distracted, Cosmo and Wanda throw themselves at their son. In general, those two are amazing in this episode, I love them. The whole operation the kids do against Vicky is great too. Love seeing them stick around to plan and then doing that plan with the Icky Vicky song playing in the background. And on that note, I love how Vicky is written. From still being horrible and exploiting kids to recognizing Dell to her love for money. Great character work. Also, she legit jump scares the kid at some point here. And I love that scene for Dev and Hazel's interactions, with Dev taking risks to save Hazel despite how it went last time he tried to protect her. Also love the scene with Cosmo and Wanda confronting her. The ending is also amazing, and again it's crazy that they never made the parallel between Dev and Perry. Absolutely amazing episode all around. For a smaller low stakes episode, the haunting of Well House is incredibly fun. It's also the one time I don't mind them bringing a brand new fairy in, but it might have to do with her not being a fairy that's there for a specific wish. She instead got trapped in a tape and is a hindrance more than anything. Also, this poor girl got scammed at the end. Like, what the hell, Jorgen, she was finally free, let her go! But yeah, outside of her, I love Marcus, so of course I'm going to enjoy this episode. Also, I love how each time he and Hazel speak to the camera, the description is based on what they're currently talking about. It's the small things. I also love how they managed to make it look like an exorcism without having Marcus ask questions, and how it even fits with the fairy being an actress. Really good episode. Best of luck is one I really have no idea what to say, since I've already talked about Perry's immaturity and Irep's personality in the spoilers part. So I guess all I have to say is that I think it's a really interesting episode. Admittedly, I don't really care that much about the rock paper scissors part, although the random epicness of the game is very funny. But yeah, everything that has to do with Irep and the way Dev is spiraling is very interesting, and the continuity in the finale with Dev being king of the world is fun. Also, does he really have a crush on Bev, or was he just flexing to show he could bend the rules? The last 3 seconds of Hazel Wells and the multiverse of Jenkins made me laugh so hard on first watch. Hazel is Dima done with his bullshit. Other than that, it's a very entertaining episode, and you can tell the writer and animator had fun with it. Also, given how dead inside Cosmo and Wanda look when singing the serial song, I can't help but think that this song is an actual commercial in Fairy World, but it's one of those commercials that always shows up. Also, the group of people falling in love with Hazel includes the girls, which is great. Also, I know Cosmo and Wanda are affected by the time loop, but I can't help but imagine that if they didn't, you just have a shot of them and Perry watching Hazel shenanigans with popcorn. Also, the Devzel shippers had a good time with this one. Good for you guys. Growing Pains feels like it should be one of those episodes where not that much happens and it doesn't say in my much, but I find it incredibly fun. I love the montage of Hazel doing teen things with Cosmo and Wanda. The pasta puberty is a mess, but it made me laugh, and good on the show for showing period products. The ending is incredibly sweet, and Marcus and Angela cheering about doing parenting right is such a mood, I love it. Also, I love how prepared Cosmo and Wanda were. You can tell they went through dealing with having a teen before. Speaking of which, we get to see Perry chill at their house, reinforcing that him and Dev are struggling to see eye to eye. So yeah, very fun episode, if not a bit gross. Fairy for a Day has such a rushed ending, like the credits started rolling before the resolution even happened. What was that about? But anyways, it's an enjoyable one, with some lore given to prepare us for the finale with a magical backup and big wand. Not really much to say, it's cute. Also, I love Hazel's hair when she's a fairy. Also, I'm not the biggest fan of her anti-fairy doing the reverse name thing. When Foop did it, it felt pretty unique. I don't know how to feel about the possibility of every new anti-fairy doing it. Granted, it gives them more of a unique identity rather than being that fairy but opposite. But I don't know, I don't like it. Other than that, it was entertaining, and cute to see Cosmo and Wanda interact with other fairies outside of the job for once. By the way, we get to see another part of Cosmo and Wanda's house, and I love how they have a picture of Timmy's hat on top of his bedroom. Really hope in a potential season 2, we'll learn how Cosmo, Wanda and Perry feel about losing Timmy, even if Timmy himself doesn't make an appearance. Stuck in my head is such a mood. Hazel wanting her friends to know everything about her so there's no miscommunications, part of her believing her friends secretly hate her trying to be a good person and hiding the nastier part of herself. We've all been there, kid. But anyways, this is a fun episode. I don't have much notes on it other than like Jasmine and Win still not being the most interesting characters. I swear, I know I'm being harsh on those two, but it's because I want to know more about them. They get tons of screen time yet feel so surface level. Mind the Gap is an episode I was a bit surprised about, in the sense that I was expecting a setup to the finale, not a one-off adventure. And as a one-off adventure, it's... I don't find the whole Tooth being an asshole thing to be interesting. Also, the Tooth Fairy refusing to listen to Hazel, and also claiming her work was a success after trying on one kid she doesn't even monitor is annoying. And since those elements make up for most of the screen time, yeah. Cosmo and Wanda don't do much either, so we don't get to bounce back on their shenanigans. I do like Jorgen being absolutely smitten with his wife, that was cute, but that's kind of it. Even the internet reference felt a bit shoehorned in, since it doesn't make sense for Hazel to say it in this context. And finally we have the finale, the Battle of Big Wand. Now, I made a Tumblr post going into detail about this episode, I won't regurgitate everything here, so go read that if you want my full opinion on this one, link in description. The short version is that, while this is a very good season finale, it's very bad as a series finale, and that's the main reason why I hope we get a season 2, outside of the fact I love the characters and there are clearly more stories to tell. It's a good culmination of the season itself, with Dev starting his redemption, them fighting the anti-fairies who were brought up earlier on, and Hazel having her friends learn about her fairies. At the same time, Cosmo, Wanda and Perry barely do anything despite being major characters. We also don't get much interactions between Hazel and Dev, despite their relationship being the crux of the serialized side of the show. And by the end of it, you're left wanting more. More on Dev and Hazel, more on Dev and Perry, more on Hazel working with Cosmo and Wanda. Hell, even more Dale! I want this man to be the main antagonist! And while not necessarily something a finale needs, I'd say it also isn't epic enough, especially with the context of there being an anti-fairies takeover. I know the fighting in this show isn't the best, but I really would have liked to see the fairies doing some of the fighting, if only to show the takeover since fairies don't have their magic afterwards. Again, good season finale, but if there's no season 2 it will leave the show on a disappointing note. There's also a bit of a pacing issue which still makes it work as a season finale, but again not as a series finale. I think this has to do with how a lot of serialized or semi-serialized shows tend to have multi-parters as finales, having 40 minutes episodes minimum instead of the regular 20 minutes ones, but not in You Wish, making the finale feel too fast in comparison. I think that's also why I was hoping for the second to last episode to at least set up some elements of the finale like the anti-fairies takeover. That way we can open Battle of Big One by getting to the point. Now, I could go over more on my thoughts, like wondering what they'll do with Perry now, or Hazel's friends keeping their memories, which I'll say I enjoy since it can open the door to new adventures and hopefully develop them more. But yeah, all of those thoughts are on my Tumblr, so go read this. For this video, we're jumping straight to the end. So to wrap up this video, since I gave a word for each episode, here's my top 5 very quickly. Number 5 is a new development because it's fucking adorable. Number 4 is Lost in Fairy World because I'm obsessed with the character writing of this one. Number 3 is Operation Birthday Take Back, and despite it not being my favorite, I actually think it's the best episode of the show for having all the important characters, one of the best throwbacks, moving the plot forward in the perfect way, and an amazing ending. Number 2 is Fly because again it's an incredibly solid introduction to the show, I love it. And number 1 is Lost and Founders Day, again for the characters' interactions, including Dev and Hazel at the end, the fun shenanigans, Perry's perfect introduction, and especially Del Dome as an antagonist. I really like this piece of shit. And with that out of the way, I don't exactly have anything else to say, so thanks for watching, feel free to tell me in the comments what you think of this review, and bye!